Today we're going to give you some tips on what you can do if you get customers who state that their VW 4-cylinder 16-valve engine either idles too high or complains that the idle fluctuates up and down occasionally when the engine is warm. Now, there are many things that can cause the engine's idle to fluctuate, such things as basic engine settings, vacuum leaks, loss of a speed sender signal to the Motronic control unit, or the T8/1 automatic volume control connected incorrectly, the idle switch out of adjustment, and the adjustment of the airflow sensor potentiometer, just to name a few. Now, when looking for the cause of high idle or idle fluctuation, always be sure that the engine's basic settings are correct and that there are not any intake system vacuum leaks. Now, be sure to check the clamp around the throttle boot. If these do not take care of the problem, there are some other things that you should check. Now, first, let's talk about the speed sender on the back of the speedometer. The fuel system ECU receives a road speed signal from this speed sender on the back of the speedometer. This signal, along with signals from the throttle switches, helps the fuel system ECU to regulate the idle stabilizer valve. If this speed signal is lost, the idle stabilizer valve may not work properly. Now, you can check to see if the speed sender is functioning by using the 1551. To check to see if the speed sender is working, connect the 1551 and access engine electronics. If the fault code G68 transmission speed sender is displayed while you're in the engine electronics mode, then there is a problem with the speed sender on the back of the speedometer or its wiring. Although the display should read G54, the 1551, even with the latest programming card installed, displays G68 for a defective speedometer sender when accessing the fuel system ECU. If, while accessing the fuel system ECU, the 1551 displays G68 transmission speed sender, before you go get another speed sender out of parts, check the wiring going from the speed sender to the fuel system ECU. If the wiring checks out okay, with the speed sender receiving power and ground, and the 1551 still shows a faulty speed sender, then you should now install a new speed sender and repeat the 1551 test. It may sound strange, but incorrect connections on the back of the radio can cause a high or fluctuating idle. Now, this is because Passats, as of model year 1990, and Cabriolet, Jetta GLI, and Corrado models, as of 1991 model year, have a connection from the speedometer speed sender circuit to the T8/1 radio connector. The purpose of this circuit is to provide speed information to the automatic volume control circuitry of radios used in some European markets. Now, even though Volkswagen-supplied radios here in the United States do not have automatic volume control, leaving the wire in the T8/1 connector and connecting it to the back of a Volkswagen radio does not cause any adverse effects to the running of the vehicle. but inadvertently connecting this circuit to a ground or power source may cause the engine idle to be too high or the idle to fluctuate, because this could disturb that signal coming from the speed sender. It may even cause shifting problems on cars with 4-speed automatic transmissions. Now, if the car you are working on has an idle or shifting complaint, and you have determined that the problem exists in the speed sensor circuit, inspect the radio to determine if it is a Volkswagen supplied radio. Now, if you're not sure that the radio is from Volkswagen, remove the wire in the T8/1 connector and tape it off. Also, check to make sure a wire has not been spliced into this radio speed circuit. If it has, remove it and connect it in a proper place. If the idle on the car still fluctuates, next you should check the adjustment of the airflow sensor potentiometer. Now, before performing this check and/or adjustment, make sure that there are not any intake vacuum leaks. This is very important. And also, make sure that the idle stabilizer valve and the idle switch are operating properly. Be sure to check the operation of the idle switch with the engine warm, because sometimes heat causes the idle switch to expand in such a way that it will work when the engine is cold, but it'll not work when the engine is warm. Most of the time, this situation can be resolved by simply adjusting the idle switch to the maximum closed specification. We've checked the basic engine settings on this car. The idle stabilizer valve is operating properly. We're sure there are not any vacuum leaks, so let's take a look at the airflow sensor potentiometer. The airflow sensor potentiometer acts like a load sensor, and it works like this. The fuel system ECU sends a fixed voltage signal to the airflow sensor potentiometer. Now, as long as the airflow sensor potentiometer operates within a predetermined range, everything is okay. But if the airflow sensor potentiometer operates outside of its range, the fuel system ECU may try to compensate for it, which could result in a high idle or the idle speed to fluctuate. To check that the fuel system ECU is putting out the correct voltage and that the potentiometer itself is working, we need to use an adapter harness, VAG 1501, or its equivalent, and a multimeter. Connect the adapter VAG 1501 between the potentiometer and the potentiometer harness connector. Now, with the 1501 connected, take your multimeter and connect the leads to the adapter ends marked 1 and to the end marked 3. Set the multimeter to the 20-volt scale. Switch the ignition on, but do not start the engine. The voltage supply should be between 4.35 and 5.35 volts. Now, this is referred to as U1 voltage in the repair manual microfiche. Now, if you don't get the reading of 4.35 to 5.35 volts, or you don't get any reading at all, check the wiring between the fuel system ECU and the airflow sensor potentiometer. If after you've checked the wiring and made sure that all the connections are good, you get a voltage reading, but you still don't get the 4.35 to 5.35 volts, replace the fuel system ECU and try the check again. Our U1 voltage on this car measured about 4.8 volts, which is within the range it's supposed to be. So now we are ready to check the U2 voltage. To make the U2 voltage check, switch the ignition off, then move the multimeter lead that is connected to the adapter harness end marked 1 to the end of the adapter harness marked 2. To check U2 voltage, the multimeter leads need to be connected to the ends marked 2 and 3 of the adapter harness. With the multimeter still on the 20-volt range, start the engine and let it idle. The engine should be at operating temperature, and the idle speed should be between 700 and 900 RPM when you make the measurement, but the radiator fan should not be cycling. Now, read the voltage. Ours is about 0.9 volts. To see if this is correct, we need to use the graph found in the repair manual microfiche. Find the U1 voltage we measured earlier on the graph. Now our U1 voltage was 4.8 volts. Plot this voltage on the U1 side of the graph. Now plot the U2 voltage, 0.9 volts, we just measured with a multimeter, onto the graph. Notice that the voltage, 0.9, is not within the shaded area of the graph. For the U2 voltage to be correct, it should be between about 0.5 to about 0.8 volts. We should now do the airflow sensor potentiometer adjustment to try to bring this U2 voltage within the shaded area of the graph. To adjust the airflow sensor potentiometer U2 voltage, we will have to first remove the sealer that covers the airflow sensor potentiometer trim screw. And with the engine off, dig out the sealer, but try not to damage the head of the trim screw. Now once the sealer is removed, start the engine and let it come to an idle. Remember, the engine should be at operating temperature and the idle speed should be between 700 and 900 RPM when making this adjustment, but the radiator fan should not be cycling. With the multimeter still connected to the adapter harness ends marked 2 and 3 and the engine idling, turn the trim screw while watching the multimeter voltage. Turn the screw until you get an acceptable voltage that will fall within the shaded area of the graph. If an acceptable voltage cannot be obtained, replace the airflow sensor assembly completely with a new potentiometer. And make sure to check the adjustment of this new potentiometer. If after these steps the vehicle still has a high or fluctuating idle, call your local zone office for suggestions and authorizations for further repairs. Well, that about does it. The things to remember when fixing a fluctuating or high idle are: check the engine's basic settings and make sure that there are not any intake air vacuum leaks. Check the operation of the speedometer speed sender and its wiring. When accessing the engine electronics mode of the 1551, the G68 fault code is actually the G54 speedometer sender fault code. Check to make sure that the T8/1 circuit for the automatic radio volume control is connected only to a VW supplied radio, or it is taped off. If the idle still fluctuates or is too high, check and, if necessary, adjust the airflow sensor potentiometer voltage. We hope that what we have shown you today you will find helpful and that it will make it easier for you to fix the car right the first time.